Hello, my friends. My name is Ryan Freeman. Welcome to this book review. Today, I am bringing to you Julius Caesar's commentaries on the Civil War. This was a war that took place after his successful conquest of Gaul. That is the first commentary, which I recommend you read before you read the Civil War. That will give you an idea of some of the conditions that set the stage for the Civil War, which was mainly fought between Julius Caesar and his allies and Pompey and his allies. I'll give you guys a brief rundown of what happened. I'll talk about why I read it, what I took away from it, and why I recommend some people out there to read it as well. But I do want to make a quick disclaimer that I am not much of a historian, and I have not really read many history books, academic history books on the topic. So I basically have Julius Caesar's narrative of what happened, and he was the conqueror. But I have read also Wikipedia's account as well. Okay, so basically Caesar spends roughly about 10 years conquering Gaul, going into Britain, having this huge successful campaign, and at the conclusion of it, how does he reintegrate into Italian politics? You know, politics is always this delicate balancing of power in any state, and in this massive empire, there was this triumvirate, this threesome of really three powerful men: Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. And then I think Crassus died because really it's just between Pompey and Julius Caesar, Pompey's allies, Caesar's allies, the Senate, all of these other minor figures. And how is Caesar, with all of his wealth, with his hardened legions, how is he going to come back into Rome? Like, is he going to retire? Is he going to hold a lot of power, a little power? And I think this is what basically causes Caesar to basically declare war on the Senate at that time, because they tell Caesar, we want you to disband your armies. Tell your soldiers to go home. And Caesar's like, well, if I do that, then I'm basically going to be out of politics. And he distrusts them. And he sort of distrusts them for a reason. Because before they asked him to disband all of his armies, they asked him to send 2 of his legions to Rome to be sent off in the Parthian War, which was this war taking place in the Middle East, I believe around present-day Syria. And so Caesar sends these 2 legions, and Rome doesn't actually send them to the Parthian campaigns, but keeps them nearby in Italy. So Caesar's sort of distrustful. Perhaps he's distrustful for a reason. And he thinks, they're trying to maneuver to sort of block me and block my ambition, and it's sort of I think it's also just from his perspective, a little disrespectful to him, dishonest. And there was also accounts of some shenanigans happening in the Senate amongst some of Caesar's allies being shushed. Some of them, I think, coming to Caesar, complaining that they've been mistreated. So Caesar suspects that Pompey and his allies are maneuvering this conspiracy against him. And so he decides, I'm not going to disband my army. I'm going to go into Italy proper by crossing the Rubicon, which that famous line that we hear Caesar said, the die is cast, as he crossed the Rubicon, leaving part of Gaul into Italy proper, where he leads into the Civil War. Although I don't believe that line is actually mentioned in his commentaries. And then Pompey, which is, the big antagonist versus Caesar. Caesar's the protagonist in this story, and Pompey is the arch rival that he is fighting. And there's all these other characters. Mark Antony makes an appearance. and Pompey's lieutenants, Scipio, forgive my mispronunciation, all of these other characters. But it's mainly, the two chess masters, Caesar versus Pompey. And Pompey runs away, and Caesar pursues, and then Caesar decides to go to Hispania, which is present-day Portugal and Spain, and conquers the forces there, and then comes back, and then goes across the Adriatic Sea to Albania, and then to Greece, and finally defeats Pompey after some, lots of setbacks, lots of battles, lots of capturing of towns, lots of changing allegiances. You might think that studying history is boring, but it's not. Reading Caesar's words, this is a man who is engaged in this epic struggle over the fate of the most important empire, at least in the Western world at that time, and the fate of the future of Western civilization was in the balance. But at least their lives at that time, and so many people's lives affected, the decisions that were made, good decisions that were made, bad decisions that were made, whether the corn was ripening at the right time. One thing you will read a lot if you read the history, where the Romans write, and particularly Julius Caesar talks a lot about the corn. Where can I find some corn? And I was very perplexed, and I find it like they love corn that much. And I didn't even know that there was corn. And so there wasn't corn, but there was corn. So what do I mean by that? Well, corn originally meant any sort of cereal grain. So wheat was a corn. Lots of things were corn. But now, today, corn is synonymous with maize, the corn that we got from the Americas. Okay, so anyways, if you're reading the commentaries and you keep seeing this word corn, Google it. It basically meant any sort of cereal grain. It's just epic battles. If you have watched The Lord of the Rings and you see Sauron's army marching on Gondor, and you see these siege towers being built, and you see the cavalry flanking lines. All of this is gone into a lot of detail. In all of these various battles, like how these battles were won. Sometimes they're won by engineering. Sometimes they're won by just the morale collapsing, news being brought, and a lot of these in this Civil War. It wasn't just like, I guess Caesar is perhaps from one point of view he's the bad guy, he's the rebel. From another point of view, maybe he's the liberator of the corruption and this conspiracy. And everyone, including the soldiers in the command of Pompey and Julius Caesar, a lot of them are switching sides. A lot of them are deserting. It's like a free-for-all. Cities are just whoever seems the most powerful, they ally with that guy. It was a wild time to be alive, a wild time to be fighting this war. And just to give you some idea of some of the numbers that were involved in the battle, I think the final battle between Pompey, like sort of the maybe not the final battle of the Civil War, but sort of the deciding battle, which I believe took place around Greece. We're talking about the tens of thousands of soldiers on each side. Pompey had a much larger force than Caesar, but Caesar's forces were hardened veterans, and Caesar also had a brilliant mind. And even though Pompey had a lot more archers and a lot more slingers and a lot more cavalry, Caesar was able to sort of nullify Pompey's cavalry, which led into just slaughtering his archers and flanking him. Sometimes it was brilliant tactics that won the day. Sometimes it was fortune. There's several parts where Caesar writes just how little trivialities can somehow decide victory or the fate of armies, about how fortune sometimes fails you and then you have to make up with it through industry. Fascinating to read how people dealt with loss and success and betrayal. There's betrayal. There's these two badass horsemen who end up leaving Caesar because they're worried he's going to punish them because they're sort of assholes, and they go on to tell Pompey all of Caesar's secrets. I mean, there's really, really cool drama interspersed, but it's mostly about troop logistics, where they marched, how they set up their camp, building these forts to circle around, try to block their forces from getting water. Sometimes one side, Pompey, had this massive fleet that controlled the Adriatic. Caesar couldn't move his forces, but Caesar could control the land. So the fleet on Pompey's side, they controlled the water, so Caesar couldn't bring in corn or and stuff, but the fleet couldn't land to get water. So I mean, it was a lot of standoff about resources. It's just, I don't know why it's fun. It's just fun. Because it's real. It's like if the Lord of the Rings was real, and it's not just who's got Gandalf on his side or who's got the Ring of Power. It's all of these factors. It's the wind. I mean, there's one point where Caesar's forces get saved by the wind, but this storm that saved them miraculously ends up destroying it and scattering into chaos a big portion of the opposing forces. It was a lot of fun, a lot of fun to read about these siege engines. And sometimes you do have to look words up because the words they're talking about are, hurdles and things that they use to cover themselves from arrows. They're building these turrets on these ramparts. And so a lot of the terminology we don't use today is all about siege warfare. So if that sounds interesting to you, I think you might like it. I know Caesar's probably regarded as a terrible man. He was a dictator. But he appears, now remember, this is Caesar's commentaries, and I think there was perhaps another author, someone under Caesar's forces, who might have written part of it. And so, obviously, it's not going to be, it's the story that he's telling, and he's saying how much clemency he's offering, how he's always giving his opponent a chance to make peace, and he's keeping his soldiers disciplined and in check and not plundering and raping along their way, and he's forgiving of people. But in Wikipedia, I don't know how true Wikipedia is, but it did say as well that Caesar did show a lot of clemency and he wasn't as brutal as he could have been. Let's just say that. I don't know. Perhaps it's great men that we sometimes admire, even if they are perhaps great men who have done crazy things like conquering and causing so much destruction and war. But I just found it fascinating to read his mind on these great acts and to know what men were going through back then. And what that and then imagining what that must have meant for their children and their wives and the fate of the Roman Empire and what those actions that took place. This was back around 50 BC, so 2070 some years ago, how those actions have cascaded on today. So the first commentary, the war in Gaul, which is much longer. Then you go to the Civil War, which is what I've just talked about. And the Civil War ends with Pompey fleeing to Egypt and getting killed. And at the time, Egypt is embroiled in its own civil war between Ptolemy, I believe he's the pharaoh, and maybe not a pharaoh, I don't know, but Ptolemy, King Ptolemy, and Cleopatra, a name that I've always heard but I've never read about. Just heard, and then Pompey he throws off his general's clothes, puts on civilian's clothes, goes to Egypt, gets murdered. Caesar follows, but Caesar doesn't have a large troop at that time because he's just trying to find Pompey as fast as possible. The Egyptians launch this conspiracy to attack Caesar, and then there's this little battle and fighting street to street, like in King's Landing in Game of Thrones, but in Alexandria, and that's where it ends. And then the next commentary is the war in Egypt. I don't know exactly how the title of it, but it's this war in Egypt when Cleopatra is going to make her entrance, and we're going to find out what happens. Caesar's outnumbered by the Egyptian army, who's also well trained, and they're fighting street to street and burning ships and securing the lighthouse Pharos, this great lighthouse, which was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So you're exposed to a lot of people: Mark Antony, Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, Pompey, as well as others, the regions that you might be familiar with. But now you're getting a firsthand account of what was happening over 2,000 years ago, and it's the drama of life and death, of valor, of courage, of intelligence, of loyalty, of betrayal. And it's a fantastic book to read if that sounds like something you're interested in. Anyways, thank you for watching this book review. My name is Ryan Freeman. I will read the last commentary. I think it's the last one, The War in Egypt. Maybe there's more. I'll read that at a future date, and I'll bring that to you as well. Thank you for watching. My name's Ryan. Bye-bye.